sloth, envy, lust, avarice, gluttony, wrath, and of course pride. The 7 deadly sins, or better yet, the taboos of building character. However, for a show about egoism and the cast being a bunch of assholes who are constantly trying to destroy one another for personal gain, the very concept of the 7 deadly sins couldn't find a better home than Blue Lock. And so, in today's video, we will be going over each sin and designating a character in Blue Lock that perfectly describes that sin. Now, before we start, I'd like to give a shout out to Truther who actually came up with this idea. However, with that out of the way, prepare yourselves because we are going to get sinful. The first sin we are going to talk about is none other than sloth. Now, sloth is actually different than laziness. It's the unwillingness to do anything, especially one's responsibilities. It's that state when you have a resentment towards doing any effort, regardless of how minuscule or big it is. The person just doesn't want to lift a finger. In fact, you can think of sloth as the extreme form of laziness. And here's the kicker, for a show about sports, you would think sloth is the only character trait that you would not find here. However, Blue Lock is just built different. While other shows have characters that represent laziness, Blue Lock actually has a fan favorite character that represents sloth perfectly, and I am sure everyone who's watching already knows who I'm talking about. Of course, I'm talking about Nagi. Now, ever since his introduction, Nagi has done nothing but complain that he doesn't want to put any effort into soccer. He would rather take the role of the goalkeeper and sleep at the back, and even skip training completely to play video games on his phone. Hell, the guy finds eating in itself painful, and we even see him being picked up and moved around by his teammates. Now granted, ever since the second selection and up to the Emiya, he actually stopped being slothful. However, after beating Isigi, he went back to his old habits. Now Nagi, despite being the personification of sloth, is still a very important character to the story. You see, he represents that genius, that very talented person who is just not willing to put any effort. And this actually made him into a fan favorite character. And because of this, he actually was an easy choice for sloth. Something that I cannot say about the next sin. I'm talking about envy. Now, envy is described as the extreme desire to acquire anything that other people have, and this actually transcends physical things, and even goes for happiness and achievements. And I'm going to be honest with you guys, I had a very hard time choosing this player, because a lot of people might seem to think it's either Ryo or Ness. However, Ryo had everything and still threw that for a challenge, and so envy doesn't fit him at all. Him having bad feelings towards Isigi for stealing Nagi are totally justifiable because he thinks that Nagi is his prideful possession and also his dearest friend. And the same thing could be said about Ness. You see, Ness is just fixated on Kaiser. His hatred for Kunigami and Isigi just stems from the fact that he worships Kaiser. And so these two players really don't fit. However, in Bastard, there is a player that was wishing that he had what Isigi had, especially after Noah joined forces with him in the Manshine City game. Of course, I'm talking about the sinking ship Emiya Kenyu. You see, on surface level, Yuki might seem like a very nice person. However, much like Kaiser deducted, he has a very ugly monster below that surface. A monster that can only be described by envy. The guy was not happy that Isigi got to play. The guy was even furious. Even though Noah's decision stemmed from Isigi's past achievement, he just was not having it. And then in the Manshine City game, he was so furious at Isigi because he was achieving what Yuki always wanted. And especially after Noah aligned with Isigi, Yuki actually fell into madness and wanted to destroy everything that is Yoichi. Fortunately for us, our main character is that smart, and he destroyed him before he could do anything. Now, to be perfectly honest, his backstory explains why Yuki is the way he is. You see, if you are a ticking bomb and you are trying to be the best as soon as possible, a person is bound to feel envious of other people surpassing him easily, and so there is a reason behind his envy. Not that it is actually justifiable, just know that there is a cause for it. However, enough about Yuki, and let's move on to the next deadly sin, which will actually be lust. Now, much like sloth, lust is pretty straightforward. But before we reveal the player who I'm sure you already can tell, let's actually describe what lust is. Lust is described by the excessive desire, especially sexually, however not bound by that necessarily. Lust involves the excessiveness of every feeling humans feel. However, for our purposes, it's going to be the sexual desire. And you might be asking, wait, what? It's a sport, why would there be any sexual desire in it? Well, tell that to our zesty demon Shido, who actually I am sure he confuses sex and football. You see, just the act of scoring goals gives Shido such an ecstasy that by his own words is comparable to giving life or getting a woman pregnant, which is just crazy and insane. This guy was almost reaching a climax just from scoring goals. And also he gets lustful towards insane players like we've seen him do with Karasu and Isigi. And even funnier, his lust go even further beyond. You see, when he plays with midfielders that feed him perfect passes, he gets lustful for them. After receiving 2 insane passes from Sai, the guy actually went to him, hugged him and asked for his number. And you might be asking yourself, maybe Shido is just a player that lets his feelings run out easily. Well, the only feeling that comes out of him most of the time is lust, and so he definitely fits with this thing. Next, let's introduce avarice, or the extreme form of greed. Avarice goes beyond just wanting to acquire stuff. Rather, it describes a person that lives and dies with collecting everything there is to collect in the world. However, and for today's video's purposes, we are going to talk about the greed side to avarice, which perfectly described the Italian Don Lorenzo. Ever since his introduction, ever since he stopped Kaiser in that historical moment, Lorenzo only spoke in terms of money. He describes the value of players by their bids, like we've seen him do with Aiko stopping Nagi's shot, and also he called Raichi Mr. Worthless because his bid was 0 at that time. I mean, it doesn't get better than this. The guy just talks money, and the guy just wants to have money, and so greed fits perfectly with him. However, here's the catch. Much like Yuki, his backstory explains why Lorenzo is the way he is. You see, growing in a slump when you had nothing to eat and nothing to wear, money quickly becomes your first priority to get. That way you can better your life. And so Lorenzo carried that into adulthood. Now, I want to make a distinction. Greed and avarice are very different from our next sin, which is gluttony. Gluttony is described by the excessive desire to eat and to devour everything, while avarice is the desire to acquire and keep material things. Gluttony, on the other hand, could be described by an infinite black hole that is ever expanding and ever devouring everything. Now, when I use the word devour, I am kinda spoiling the player I chose for gluttony. Of course, it's not other than our main character, Isigi Yoichi. Now, Isigi's whole persona revolves around his adaptability, his ability to devour allies and enemies alike, to morph and consume every play he witnesses and improve to better himself. That's the definition of gluttony if I ever seen one. It's not related to food, but actually related to skill and talent. Isigi is the ultimate black hole on the field. He's a freaking player that was constantly trying to devour the best players in the world, despite not matching them at all. And hell, he even succeeded in devouring the second best player in the world twice. Now, to be honest, this gluttony of his is the reason why his adaptability is so broken. Again, much like a black hole, no matter what you are trying to throw at Isigi, you are just making the black hole bigger and stronger. You are just making Isigi more insane. And honestly, for a character who is unassuming outside of the field, he gets pretty scary on the field due to his gluttony. And trust me when I tell you, there is not a single person in Blue Lock that has that desire to devour everything as much as Isigi. And so, Isigi is the sole representative of gluttony. Alright, next let's move to the before last sin. Of course, I'm talking about wrath. Now here's food for thought. The player I am actually going to show is actually a very calm player. He's a player that if you do not cross, you would not think that he is very wrathful. But first, let's describe what wrath is, because it's very different than simply anger. You see, wrath is described by the extreme continuous rage that burns like a fire inside of one's heart. It's the ultimate character trait that entices destruction. And again, by saying destruction, I am hinting at the player. Of course, I'm talking about Rin the Destroyer. Now, as I said, Rin actually seems very calm. His aura is actually exemplified by water. And so, you know, Rin is the most calm player on the field. Maybe second only to Noah. There is, granted you don't cross him. If you come between Rin and his desire to be number one, or Rin and his brother Sai, you are going to meet the Destroyer. You are going to meet the personification of wrath. where Rin goes from a very tactical player to a destroyer that aims to bring the best of everyone so he can destroy them completely. And what makes it funny is that while other players try to defeat each other and score over each other, Rin on the other hand aims for that kill. He told Isagi to simply forget about who's going to win. This time he will destroy him, he will kill him. Man, this is such a character twist for us. We went from Ren being such a calm, such a collected character, to then him getting angry at the World 5 for defeating him, to then being the personification of rage and wrath in the U20 game and now in the PXG game. But enough about wrath and enough about Ren. For our final sin, we are obviously going to talk about pride. And actually, pride is probably the hardest sin to describe by just one character. You see, being a show about egoism, you bet your sweet ass every great player is prideful in heart. However, we're not here to talk about prideful people. We are going to talk about the prideful of the prideful. And actually I have two characters which are Chris Prince and Baru Shoei. However, if it is not obvious, no one can defeat the king when it comes to being prideful. The guy had his whole world being shattered just from giving one pass to Isagi, and he swore revenge on him. That's definitely a crazy level of insane when it comes to being prideful. Baru thinks of himself as the king of the field, the king of the world, and the king of football, and anything and anyone should bow to him. Everyone should play for the sake of him becoming number one. And that's definitely pride personified, and I wouldn't really have it any other way. Despite the show presenting a lot of prideful people, Baru is the most fitting for this scene, and thus he is the last player on our list. And with that, we reach the end of the video. I hope you guys enjoyed. Until next time, thank you for watching.